Previously, I have worked with a variety of very good writers, but I wanted to make something that was all my own.
Hello and welcome to another video edition of the Ryan Claytor Patreon podcast. My name is Ryan Claytor. I'm a university professor and a comics artist, and I also have a Patreon page. So on this Patreon page, you're going to find a bunch of my artwork, early looks, exclusive looks at things like my comic book illustrations, neon design, watch designs, and even some custom illustrations and podcasts, which is what you're about to listen to right now. So for this edition of the Ryan Claytor Patreon podcast, I am chatting with my good friend and incredible comics artist and gaming artist, Jason Strutz, who has a new comic book that he's working on called Returned. And what I think is really interesting is that he's starting to share this process of making the graphic novel Returned on his Patreon page, which you can find right here. So if you head over to Jason's Patreon page, which you can find at this URL or down in the notes for today's episode, you'll see things like script pages paired with his thumbnail illustrations as he works his way toward final pencils, inks, and colors for the book itself until it's finally released. But I think that he's doing something really interesting, bringing people along on the ride for this new work that he's creating. So without further ado, let's welcome Jason Strutz. Hey, Jason. Great to have you on the Ryan Claytor Patreon podcast. And just to let my patrons know, Jason is not only a fellow cartoonist and a really darn good one at that, but he's also a really darn good friend of mine too. We have children who play together, and Jason and I play together, and we've known one another for almost the entirety of our children's lives, which is, about 8 years at this point. So Jason is working on a project that I'm going to let him tell you about in just a second, but it's called Returned, and it has a great many adjectives, medieval, family, zombie. I'm going to screw it up, so I'm going to stop there. But I want you to tell my patrons all about it, because I think you're doing something really interesting, not only with your project that you're working on right now, but also with revamping your Patreon page. And I hope we can get into a little of both of those things, but why don't you get us started here by introducing yourself and Returned.
Sure. So I'm, as Ryan said, I'm Jason Strutz. I've been doing comics for at least 10, 12 years at this point. Comics and illustration. And I have decided to take on my own writing project. So starting Returned and getting it to this point has been a long road of learning both how to write and then actually writing a script. But what I've come up with is what's being shown now, and that's a horror, fantasy, family drama with zombies. And it goes through part of my mission with it is to go through a lot of the tropes of zombie movies and media, and present that kind of in different sections of the story. But yeah, it's been a road to get here. I had originally planned to spend 2019 both reading and learning how to write my own books. Previously, I have worked with a variety of very good writers, but I wanted to make something that was all my own. So I spent 2019 reading and writing while my daughter was finishing her last year of half-day school, and looking forward to the 2019-2020 school year, where my daughter would be starting full-time school, and I would have a script ready to work on when I had more time on my hands. And then 2020 happened, and that did not turn out to be the case. So I've been working on this, I was able to work with a professional editor, Beth Scorzato, on kind of beating the script into shape. And then it was sort of a matter of waiting until the time was right again to start working on it. And that has pretty much been my 2022, in which I've started really making time and space to actually start producing the art for this script, so that I'm able to start showing it to people now. So what you're seeing on patreon.com/strutzart is basically would have been my plan as of like April 2020, just a couple years past when it was supposed to start.
Yeah, so first of all, I love seeing people tackle their own projects, and I love seeing single auteur work. And I was so excited when you started telling me that you were going to write your own book and it was going to be a complete Jason Strutz vision. So I am very excited about that. You mentioned your editor. I'm hoping maybe you can give us maybe some credits that she has to her name, and also walk us through what's happening on your Patreon right now, because I think that's really interesting, because you're right in the middle of creating this book and really taking people along with you on this ride. So do you mind first talking about your editor and then jumping into Patreon?
Yeah, so Beth Scorzato is just someone I knew from being at comic shows and knowing her working at various YA publishers, putting out Power Rangers books and other licensed books. And she has sort of moved away from that professionally and moved into more production in Hollywood, but does do comics freelancing, comics editing as a freelance job. So knowing her, I wanted to both go with someone that I knew. My main character in the book is a woman, so I wanted to make sure that I had some woman involved in the process of this book, and I want to have that sort of diversity, and that's kind of the only place that I can have diversity in my one-man show here. But I went to her, if only to have some sort of sanity check of like, here, I wrote this thing. I've shown it to my wife and a friend of mine, and they both liked it, but they're also my wife and a friend of mine. So I wanted to, as my first project, I wanted to have some sort of like, is this a real thing check of like, did I do the thing? So that process was nice because she did go through it. She told me things which worked, things which didn't work. We had a few conversations on the phone, trying to hash out just character motivations, and then went back with a couple revisions of scripts, and it was a pretty smooth process, and was nice to have kind of a professional second opinion on what I was doing. So I think that was a positive process. I think that would be something that I would recommend to anybody who was working in writing, learning writing, and looking to put out, a book that, is going to consume, a year and a half at least of your life, and be able to have just kind of that, second opinion on what you're doing. And part of my impetus on that was to limit some of my propensity to second guess, in that I want to write a script, and I basically want that to be done when I'm sitting down to do art. I don't want to sit down and do art and then start having a lot of second thoughts about the script or what's happening in the script. So I really wanted to lock that down before I sat down to do the art. And mostly because I've been doing art for a very long time. I feel like I mostly know how to do that. Um, I wanted to make sure that I was starting from a good base of script.
Yeah, and speaking of art for the book, I want you to tell us about what's happening on your Patreon right now, because I think it's really interesting. Like, basically, you're right in the middle of this book. You have completed the script and you're working your way through thumbnails as we speak. And as you are creating these thumbnails, you are releasing them with pages of script, like paired together, so that we can see your process as you move from only words to also pictures. Yeah, tell us about your thought process surrounding this, because I know that you had a Patreon page before. It's the same Patreon page, but you had a process that you were going through on Patreon and supplying content for your patrons. But you've sort of shifted that focus to be about this new book. So why don't I turn you loose so you can tell us about all that?
Sure. When I first started my Patreon, it was very early in Patreon's life. And I had structured it as many Patreons are and were, with many tiers. The higher tiers are getting you like a postcard, something physical sent to you. And as kind of time went on and I kind of settled into where my patron level was going to be with both my reach and what I was offering, it kind of ended up in a spot where I was not able to put enough time towards it to truly justify that to a lot of people. So it started out as a kind of general, here's news, here's stuff about me, here's what I'm doing. Here's some extra stuff like wallpapers. Here's a postcard from art that I've already made, and it just sort of got to a level and just kind of sat there, and I was not able to put the time towards it that it really deserved. Partly because I was working for a lot of other people. I'm working with companies. I'm working with RPG art companies. I'm working with comic publishers and writers who don't really like their early stuff being released. So it's tough to work in an industry that really is driven by a lot of secrecy in some ways, and try to run this semi-public look into what I'm doing. There were plenty of times where I had projects to work on that I just couldn't show. So that kind of limped along. I fulfilled, many of the things that I told people that I would, but it really wasn't doing as much as I, would have liked it to do. So then again came 2020, where I have a then 7-year-old daughter, and she was in school, and now we're all home. I was working from home to begin with, so I took over a lot of the home teaching assistant jobs. I'm not going to say I was a teacher, because that's disrespectful to all the teachers who did a lot of work during that time. But being a parent at that time was also a job in and of itself. So I shortly after that pandemic started, and the school, got past their first deadline of maybe we'll come back on this day. I said, this isn't going to happen. This isn't going to happen. I need to make sure that I'm being semi-ethical about this, and sent all of my patrons a message and said, I will not be able to fulfill a lot of what I said I was going to do, and that I hoped that the Patreon would come back. So I didn't want to delete my account and go like nuclear on it, but that, I wasn't going to be able to service this in the way that I wanted, which was disappointing, because that was going to be the place that I was going to bring what is now returned. So had, as many people did, a little professional freak out in 2020 and dropped clients and dropped Patreon and figured that this was my life now.
Now that we're in 2022.
Now that we're in 2022.
Speaking of returned, you have returned.
I have
right?
returned. Yeah.
To
I
Patreon.
walk outside, everything is beautiful. The sun is glowing. There are roses everywhere. Everything's perfect now. If only my daughter is going to school full time. And I guess part of my other ability with this is that I'm working a full-time job with 2C Gaming, which is a role-playing game publishing company.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that specifically, but before we get too far off the topic,
sure.
I want to hear about your Patreon right now. What are you doing?
So Patreon right now. So about a month ago, I looked at the pile of work that I've created this year in working on Returned, and that I had the script, and I decided I was going to start waking up early in the morning to knock out page sketches for this book that I had spent a lot of time writing, and I enjoy, and I think it's good. So I've been getting up early to do these page sketches. I sat down and I looked at what I had. Did a little bit of math to figure out like how much of a buffer I had. So now I have relaunched the Patreon that is now all returned focused with one $5 tier. Yeah, there you go. With one $5 tier. And that $5 tier gets you 2 updates a week. Each update contains 1 page of script, commentary on that, usually a couple paragraphs of what I'm trying to do with this scene, this page, and then 1 page of the sketch, the corresponding sketch to that script page, some commentary on that, which is more comics making focused. So I'm breaking down there what I'm doing with the form, what I'm doing with lettering, what I'm doing with leading your eye around the page. I've got one coming up right now that's all about like medieval comics are fun because you can always use the sword to point to the next panel. And then I also have a backstory section of each update, which kind of lays out what I'm thinking with the book, how I'm creating the book, such as programs or writing or books that I read in learning how to write. So I'm hoping that it's a real sort of resource and look into the process of somebody who always wanted to write their own things, but was scared to for many reasons, and took that plunge to try and figure out how to make this work.
Yeah, and I've been following along since you relaunched your Patreon page, and I've been having a really great time reading through your thought process for these pages. And I hope that some of my patrons will check out your page as well, which is at patreon.com/strutzart. And I'll include a note. I'll include a link to that in the show notes for today's episode. But I'd like to ask you a couple things. I swear I want to get to 2C Gaming.
That's okay. Yeah.
But right before that, let's talk about your process for moving through Returned, because you talked about how you're getting up early, you're working on thumbnail sketches for the pages. But what does that process look like for you right now? Because 2C Gaming, which you're going to tell us about eventually, is a full-time job. It's an at-home job, but it's a 40-hour-a-week job that keeps you pretty busy. So what does your schedule look like? Like, when are you getting up? How much time are you spending on Returned? When do you shift into 2C gaming mode? And then do you have a new early bedtime because of all this? Like, how is all this working for you?
So what I'm doing is somewhat masochistic in that I'm trying just to do more. So what I decided to do beginning of 2022, I don't like to call them New Year's resolutions, but like there are things that I want to do with the next year that I think about at the end of the previous year. And what I've been doing right now is waking up about 6:30, and that sounds, normal to many people. I don't want to present that as something super extreme, but I was more of a night owl before this, where as a pure freelancer, I would be staying up till 1, 2 in the morning working on things. And I think that right now where I am, the morning works better for me. But waking up at 6:30, getting a cup of tea, and sitting down. Most recently on my my iPad, where I'm using Clip Studio Pro, which is a very obscenely fully featured iPad app. And I have printed out the comic script here with 4 pages on one sheet because I'm stingy about paper. But I sit down, open up the new page. I've made a template where I can see, was it 18 pages, 12, sorry, 12 pages at a time. So I can see 6 spreads. So I can make sure that I'm designing for somebody looking at the book. So I can see 6 page spreads on this template that I've made. And I sit down and just start doing rough sketches on this page. So if I have a 5-panel page, I start looking at what happens in each panel and start trying to break down, would this be better as a wide panel? Would this be better as a tall panel? How is this page going to read? What's the most important part on each page? I did, while writing, I did try to not think a lot about art. And now that I'm in art, the art stage, I'm really cursing some of my crowd scenes. In that I've decided to start this book with a extended action sequence. But I sit down, I try to figure out what's the best way for this page to look. So I'm usually working from about 6:45 till about 8 o'clock. I'm right now, my schedule allows for doing 1 page layout sketch a weekday. Will end me with a good buffer to start doing final art, hopefully. So I think it's a reasonable schedule for me at the moment. So I work till about 8 o'clock. I go get my daughter up, get her breakfast, make a lunch, and then I sit down to do my day job, which is doing illustration for 2C Gaming. I work for them until about 5 or 5:30, and then my evenings are up in the air. If I'm left alone, if nobody else wants me to do anything, I'll sit down and do more drawing, basically. And then, yeah, evenings, I attempt to get to bed by 11:30, but not as nice a bedtime as you might like. But I do try to keep that mostly to the weekdays and sleep in on the weekends.
Cool. Yeah, I know that you were kind of a night owl before, so I was surprised to hear when you said you were waking up in the mornings. I didn't know that was part of your routine. So, but I didn't want to throw you under the bus either.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Thanks
Yeah,
for walking us.
I think for me, staying up late was good for finishing projects that are already started, for just keeping on the track that you've been on all day, just going. Like at some point, there are different levels of mental concentration needed for art making. You need the most when you're planning out what you're going to do and what it's going to look like and the origination of those ideas. And at some point, it's just executing that idea. And that's when you need less, less brain power. And that's easier to do at night. I can just continue working. But doing something like storytelling and planning and such that that returned is needing at the moment, I need to be a little fresher for that. And I think that works better in the mornings.
Yeah.
For me, at least.
I feel very similarly with my work. There's the thinky stage, which is like the scripting and the penciling of the page. Like I cannot talk to anyone or be distracted when that's happening. But inking a page, I can do that with my eyes closed. I can color, till the cows come home. But so I totally get it.
Next time.
Maybe it would look a little better, but I do what I can. Anyway, so this is really interesting to hear your process. And you've got a huge buffer as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you're already script finished and thumbnails finished for what, like about half the book or more?
About half the book right now. Yeah. So looking at my math, like I would be switching over to doing final art sometime in July. So I'll be doing behind the scenes, I'll be doing the final art, and my buffer will run out somewhere in September. And then at that point, I'll be switching the Patreon over to whatever schedule I feel comfortable doing for final pages. That may be 1 page a week. That would be at least 1 page a week. And we'll see how my buffer looks, how my speed looks. That part's a little up in the air. There will be at least 1 page a week, though.
Yeah. So just to put my patron's mind at ease, if you're thinking, oh, well, maybe I'll hop over, but it sounds like he's not sure about that buffer. Jason's got a huge buffer. In fact, at this point, you could not do anything for 6 months and still be all right. But I know you're still going to be working on this
untrue.
Stuff. It sounds like it. Yes. I mean, you've got several months ahead of you. Am I mistaken in saying that?
No. That's right. But I would not feel comfortable stopping at any point. The train is moving.
Yes.
And barring something crazy like a worldwide pandemic, we should be on the road to actually getting this done.
Yeah.
And seeing how people enjoy it and respond to it, and seeing what that means for the rest of my career.
Yeah. So all this to say, by the time you get to art duties, penciling, inking, coloring, whatever, you're going to have been doing that for several months by the time your Patreon catches up with penciling, inking, whatever duties that you've moved on to since scripting and thumbnails, correct? Yes. So you should probably have a pretty sound idea of a reasonable schedule once you get to that.
Yeah. And that's I have a very good idea of my current speed of the stage I'm in and the current schedule. I just want to express a little wishy-washiness about what happens when I start making final art, other than I will be releasing final art on the Patreon.
Yeah. So that's what I think is so cool about what you're doing. Like, you're going through this very systematic process of creating a larger work and taking people through that process with you. So I really just wanted to sort of point my finger toward Jason's Patreon page in hopes of directing a few folks there, because I've been following along and I think it's really, really interesting what you're doing. But I promised to ask you about 2C Gaming, which is your full-time art gig, which is relatively new in your life. You've been doing it as a
full-time person. Yeah. So I've been working for them for about 6 years as a freelance, sort of in increasing capacity, to the point where 2021, I was working mostly for them, just in terms of time and ability at that, you know, slightly post-pandemic time. So they were the majority of my freelance kind of right before that, and they offered me a full-time position end of last year, which was a surprise and a little terrifying because I have what I call freelance abuse syndrome. In that, I always have to try to do everything as quick as possible, and everyone's kind of out to get me, and a little bit of freelance paranoia. So initially, I was like, "What's your angle on this? What's your scheme here?" But it's worked out really well. Basically, I'm working 40 hours for them, making art for their role-playing books. Yeah, it's been working real well. I'm moving into some art direction for them. We have some good books coming up. I'm able to use a variety of styles there too. I'm doing a very friendly kind of crafty style for this upcoming book. So that's been nice, and what it has provided me in this case, relevant to Returned, what it's provided me with is a dependable schedule. As a freelance person before, or as a pure, find the next job, it was, at least for me, feeling that I had to get everything done as soon as possible, because the next email is my next job, and I never want to say no to a good opportunity. So where I was with freelance was that everything was a sprint. Everything had to be done right away. And it just turned out that I just kept rolling on different projects. So sitting down to work on my own project, which is not necessarily making me any sort of money, was a hard decision for me personally to make. And then to promote that, while I know that people who are watching my promotions are wondering where their work is, was a real mind bender for me. And that, I always wanted to be, serving the people who were paying me freelance money, and to spend a lot of time and promotion space on my own things was something that if I was them, I would be wondering why he's not working on my job that I'm paying him money for.
Yeah, that's a weird position to be in.
And to not have a dependable schedule where sure, I would have days that were not where I didn't have something due soon, or I didn't have something already lined up, and maybe that would be a day I worked on Returned, but I might get one of those a week. I might get one of those a month. I get 3 of those in a row. There was no real telling when would be a good time to sit down and work on my own thing.
Yeah.
And
freelancer's life is wildly unpredictable.
Yeah, so unpredictable that it was tough to plan what I was doing next. And some of that is my own issues with that. Like, most people would be fine with me promoting my own thing. I know that, but I didn't want to introduce any sort of uncertainty in clients.
Yeah. So with regard to 2C gaming, you said that one of the best things it's given you is a schedule, a dependable schedule that you can rely on, so that you can make a schedule for yourself as well, which is super important. But I'm also curious about, not from the logistics side, but from the creative side, from the artistic side. You've been putting out a ton of really incredible work and been involved with some really successful campaigns for them. Like, right after you jumped on board, they had a campaign for a gaming book that went well into 6 figures. I think it was 160, 170, 180. I can't remember where it stopped, but sort of beside the point. the point is you've been doing a ton of artwork for them. And I'm curious about how artistically you've been affected by working that 40-hour consistent work week. So how has that upped your artistic game in any way? How has that changed the way you think about art? How has that made you more efficient? I'm curious about that.
So positives, it has in some ways freed me up to spend a little more time on some art, where working a freelance job, I've already decided how much this art is going to cost and what I'm going to get paid. So every hour I work on it, my hourly rate is constantly going down. So I'm sure, times at which I decided, okay, I need to be done with this in an hour. Like I could do this better, but I need to wrap this up. So being on a more of a salary basis, I'm a little more focused on making kind of the best art in a little bit more drawn out timeline, not a lot. My goal for most things is like, I want to be able to get a piece done in a day. Any piece that's taking me longer than a day is, it starts to become torture. So there are limits, but I do think that I'm spending more time on some aspects of the art, which I like, and I think I'm making generally better stuff than I did as a freelancer, and with more happiness in terms of my pay, in that I don't have to think about A, my hourly rate, or B, like, did I charge enough for this piece? Did I ask for enough? Could I have asked for more? This was a big issue in my freelance career, in that I would probably, it's tough to tell, probably undercharge for a lot of my art. So just not having to think about that aspect has been very freeing. So I think I've been producing good art for them. I do a lot of it. We just finished a book, and I think I did like 50 to 60 pieces for this, for a book called Weird Wastelands, a lot of which were painted pieces. And I've been on that job for a couple months, 2.5 months or so. So that's, working out to like a piece a day, which is kind of my preferred schedule on that. And that's, varying between portraits and figures and landscapes and whole variety of art assets that's needed for that.
And this is all done for sort of a D&D type of gaming booklet. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. There's source books for Dungeons and Dragons system role playing. Typically, my company has focused on higher level Dungeons and Dragons play, so very hard monsters for very skilled people. But we've been branching out a bit into a few other areas recently. So I think that's been the positives of working that as a full-time job. Some negatives have just been, increased wrist pain. Not exactly pain, but I've been, making sure that I'm wearing my wrist guards and wraps and such, and making sure that I'm using some good sitting and standing and moving around. I have a larger drawing monitor that I can use standing up, so that's been good. But there is some increased strain on the wrist that hadn't been there before. But it's been all right. And then, I do have the ability to work for anyone else that I want. I'm not exclusive to this company, but my drive to do more role-playing game art illustration is low after doing it all day. So
you mean you've been fulfilled by your full-time job?
I have had my fill of, yeah.
Had your fill.
So I have not done as much of that, and but I have found that comics, doing narrative work, doesn't hit me in that same way that doing more straight illustration has,
Yeah.
which is I'm thankful for that I'm able to both still do some art outside of my regular art job.
That's great. That's great. And I think we're all benefiting for it. And we're getting a little long in the show here. So I wanted to see if there was anything that you wanted to let my patrons know about with regard to Returned or your Patreon, or any closing thoughts that you might have.
Sure. Yeah, I just want to go over the Patreon stuff again. I have a single $5 tier that gets you everything that I'm putting out for Returned. That's 2 pages of script a week, 2 art sketches a week. And those are also lettered. So I'm doing lettering for all of these sketches. It may be preliminary lettering. And I'm sure that Ryan will yell at me for something there.
I haven't yet.
You haven't yet. Please comment. So that will get you everything that I'm doing with Return, and that's script, sketches, that's commentary on everything. I'm spending a good amount of time on writing up what I'm doing with the inception of this project, because it's been a long time coming. It was percolating for a while. It's got a good backstory in that the original book was a 24-hour comic that I did a few years ago. And that was the sort of basis, the jumping off point for this graphic novel. So it's got a good backstory. So I'm showing a lot of that 24-hour comic. I'm showing, script stages, sketch stages, concept art. It's basically a good mix of everything that I'm working on right now. And I'm enjoying writing that stuff up, and that it's pleasant, and actually it helps me going forward kind of remember what I did and what I'm doing and what I'm attempting to get people to see. So hopefully it provides a good dimension on the creation of the work.
Yeah, I kept thinking this has got to be good for you to really solidify these ideas in your mind and to concretize some of the things that you were thinking about as you were scripting it, and also thumbnailing, so that when it comes time to illustrating the final book, like, you're gonna have this down pat. It's not like this is something that you just did once. Like, you've gone over this book many times in many different ways.
Yeah. And that's good, because it's been longer than I initially thought it would be. It's good that I'm able to remind myself of what my original thoughts were with this piece. So it's been pretty helpful, I think. I enjoyed that process of remembering.
Yeah, it's great to hear that there is benefits on the creator side, because I know that from the spectator side, being a part of your Patreon, it's been a real pleasure seeing these scripts and thumbnails appear every week. And just real quickly, to folks that are listening who are considering jumping on Jason's Patreon, we're talking here at the beginning of May, and he's just starting to put out pages. So it's not like you're going to have a bunch of catch up to do. Like, he's still right at the beginning of this. So it's a great jumping on point. So before we head out, can you spell out your Patreon for us so we make sure we know where to go? It's patreon.com/StrutzArt. How do you spell that, Jason?
Yes, that's STRUTZART. Patreon.com/StrutzArt. That's my last name that I've been blessed with because it's very unique. You can look up Jason Strutz and you'll find me pretty much everywhere. Most of the top Google results are for me.
Actually,
which
you.
is nice.
That's awesome.
Which is nice. It's a unique name that I've been blessed with. But,
I had the same pleasure for a very long time until there was a female contestant on The Bachelor named Ryan Claytor,
wow,
and now
okay.
she's got a bunch of hits when I do ego Google searches, So anyway, that's again beside the point. Thank you so much, Jason, for coming on the Ryan Claytor Patreon podcast to let my patrons know about the really fantastic work that you're doing over on Patreon as well. And for my patrons, hey, it probably goes as no surprise that I'd recommend you take a look at what Jason's doing too. So Jason, thank you for coming on. Great to chat with you as always.
Very good. Thank you.
Hey Jason, it was great chatting with you today. Thank you so much for coming on to my podcast. And I've had a really great time checking out the process that you're going through to make your new graphic novel Returned. And I think a lot of other folks will too, so I hope you'll head over there. In the meantime, if you've enjoyed the content you've been watching today, head over to my Patreon page as well, over at patreon.com/Ryan Claytor. Over there, you'll find a bunch of artwork that I do, from comics to neon design, watches, custom illustration, and more. In the meantime, I've had a great time chatting with you, and I will see you next post.